Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is DRM Unfiltered, the podcast that dares to go beyond the buzzwords. Let's get ready for some bold conversations with our experts, clients, and industry leaders that are transforming capital project delivery. From real world Primavera breakthroughs to game changing strategies and success stories, we're serving up unfiltered insights that fuel innovation and inspire the future of project controls. No fluff, no filters, just the voices that are shaping tomorrow. Welcome back, Garrett. Good to see you again. Why don't you give
Hey Dan, great to see you
yourself a
too.
quick
How you been?
introduction?
Just living the dream, brother.
Nice. Give yourself a quick introduction for our audience. That way they know who you are.
Sure. My name's Garrett Harley. I work in our construction engineering business unit here at Oracle. I oversee our product marketing for essentially our Primavera product line. That would include Primavera P6 as well as Oracle Primavera Cloud. And thanks for having me back.
Hey, good to have you back. Today's session, we're going to tackle one of the most important decisions in project controls, choosing between Oracle Primavera Cloud and Primavera P6. This isn't just going to be a technical comparison, it's about scheduling smarts. We're going to explore how each platform supports complex projects, from scalability to usability and performance. Along the way, you'll hear some candid insights from our Oracle expert who has navigated both of these tools, uncover some lessons learned and strategies that drive success. Our goal by the end of this conversation and our hope is that our audience will walk away with unfiltered perspectives to help you decide which solution best fits your organization's schedule needs. You ready to get this started?
Do it, kid.
All right. Well, let's start off with we'll start off with a softball question for you. How do the scheduling engines in OPC and P6 compare in terms of accuracy, flexibility, and performance?
Well, let's just hit them one at a time. So maybe the underlying thing to understand is that the DNA of the algorithms in running the schedule calculations between what we do in Primavera P6 and in Oracle Primavera Cloud are exactly the same. So as far as the algorithm is concerned, they're identical. So results, as far as the brand, the legacy of being able to trust those results, the accuracy of those results should be identical, right? We have not done anything to change the algorithm between those two options. But that doesn't mean that the way that the volume of the data, can't be important, and that the performance of how those calcs run can't be important. Obviously, the larger schedules get, irrespective of whether or not we're talking about P6 or OPC, the bigger schedules get, the longer sometimes those calcs can run. And there's lots of things that can influence that latency. Like, as you know, when you're working with customers that are running large programs with, multiple tens of thousands of activities, and they're resource and cost loaded, and there's a lot of details associated with how those projects are set up and are designed to perform. Sometimes calcs can run a little bit differently between those two, one of them in a cloud calculation, one of them in an on-premise calculation. We've continued to make a lot of improvements in the Oracle Primavera Cloud, as far as the performance on how those calcs run and the timing that most folks should be associated with running large projects. I think that was a hit, and probably a realistic criticism, maybe not criticism, a realistic hit on just how cloud products have originally started off and how they've matured over time to be able to run larger data set calculations at a faster rate. So, that there's probably we do have a lot of performance testing and metrics that we do, on running either a P6 calc or an OPC calc, and they're pretty dang close, surprisingly. Um, Irrespective of the project size, which is somewhat remarkable because we do have customers that run massive, massive networks, in the, 40 to 50 to 60,000, activity network streams. So it's not uncommon depending upon the type of thing that's being made. But, some folks have a lot of comfort and familiarity with just being able to, control a little bit more of what they want in an on-premise universe and being able to play with things like P6. And P6 isn't going anywhere. So we're more than happy to have a loyal following, within that brand. And it's been around for, multiple decades now. It's very well proven to be able to handle large, complex projects. I think what's surprising for some folks that may not know is that Oracle Primavera Cloud is also pretty good at handling large projects. It's also great at handling small project work, which P6 kind of isn't maybe as good at. But we can talk more about, more of those things. But from the true performance side, when you put them side by side, when we start talking about, networks that are getting into the 10 to 20,000 activity networks on individual projects, the calcs are almost identical, which is great. And it's pretty rare that you're going to see projects that are in the 40 to 50 to 60,000 range. But, by the time you start putting those things into major programs, it's a real issue. It can be a real issue since you're obviously trying to get lots of different parties and lots of different stakeholders all there when you're hitting F9 at the same time. But they're on the performance side, they're pretty darn close.
That's fantastic. And, you kind of mentioned the viability once you get into those large complex projects versus the smaller projects. And that kind of leads into, and I saw this years ago when I was doing a project review. It was a 4 mile long bridge replacement project, and they had about 200,000 activities that we were running in P6. Obviously, when you get something that size, it's going to have a little bit of latency. But in talking about that versus the large complex and the small projects, what do you see are the strengths and potential limitations of each tool when you are managing those complex project schedules that have thousands and thousands of activities?
Yeah. So there's just the data volume itself, which is certainly, one thing to get your arms around. The other is how we might be able to break project work up into more what I'll just think of as like bite-sized chunks. That 200,000 activity network that you were just describing was probably made up of, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but was probably made up of a variety of different sub-projects associated with it. So it's relatively rare that you're actually popping open the entire, the whole enchilada, as it were.
Mhm.
You're doing that at usually like monthly closeouts to be able to get all the reporting and all those things sort of, lined up and finalized. But for the most part, most folks are day in and day outing into something that's a little bit more bite-sized. And there's lots of configurability that P6 has always had, being able to create sub-projects and let interdependencies between sub-projects that when you finally go to calculate everything together, it can understand all those interdependencies and, give us the final answer on the network. The same thing is true in OPC, right? So, like I said, the underlying algorithms are identical between the two products, the two platforms. So, but the configurability options that you get and being able to change, that same sort of concept of interdependencies between sub-projects and a concept that we've moved over to in Oracle Primavera Cloud we call workspaces. And workspaces are other ways that you can aggregate and put projects into essentially like smaller compartments that sort of help the security of how folks are going to go in and interact with the system is a little different than the way that we structured it within the hierarchy of what we did for P6. So there's some changes in sort of what the look and feel in the store, kind of looks like. I know we talked about some of this stuff last time, but it really is just a preference thing when you get right down to it. I think a preference and performance component can help direct folks on sort of what option may suit them better. We've we've got a loyal following, like I was mentioning on the P6 side, that are pretty happy in that tool, and it is great. It is great. I mean, it is the 900-pound gorilla in handling, the largest, most complicated projects the world's ever seen, as far as physical assets and infrastructure are concerned. So it's got a proven track record with it. I think what we're slowly getting better at, and like I was mentioning on the parity component of how we perform and our user-based testing and our performance testing on our database when it's put in Oracle Primavera Cloud running on Oracle Tech, it's pretty damn good and getting better every day. And we do a lot of optimization, not just at the application, but at the database layer to be able to help those things, get better over time.
Yeah, you are correct. I mean, that project, in reality, it was one project as a whole, but it was about 50 sub-projects between the building of the new bridge side by side to the previous bridge. And then the second part of that was the demolition of the existing bridge once that new one was complete. But again, it was almost a 4 mile long bridge. So yeah, it was about 50 different sub-projects consisting of one project in a whole. So yeah, you are taking smaller bites of the apple at each time and phase of it, but in the overall structure of it, it was one that was probably the largest project I think I've ever worked on.
Yeah, what I find kind of fascinating is, when you and I started this whole thing in P3, the database itself could handle 100,000 activities.
Yeah.
And
And
I think of this kind of like putting, if you're redesigning your kitchen and you sort of ask for more counter space, what you end up doing is just filling it up with more crap. And and in a way, the advancements on the database side have let us put more information into schedules, which is great on one hand. But there's also an argument to be made for the schedules that we're building now are 25 times bigger than they were in the 80s. Now, some of that is just based upon the fact that we can handle more data, but it doesn't necessarily also mean that the schedules are any better. So we've done some creative things. Even in the P6 world, we did some creative things with utilizing things like steps, where I think about trying to create an activity network, a contract network that is detailed enough for me to be able to understand the requirements of that scope. And then something like a step routine was a way to be able to add subroutines into being able to collect progress against activities without adding more activities to the network. So steps was one of those places that we were trying to inject maybe we could help you keep the volume of the activity count down. And sometimes contractually, this isn't an option, right? Like when I was working on government contracts, you're required to have 2 week durations on everything. So good luck. You're going to have a lot of activities in those projects. That's fine. But similarly, what we did in Oracle Primavera Cloud, kind of like steps, but better than steps, is our task engine. And the concept there, Dan, and I know you know this, but for those that are new and aren't familiar with this, there's a way to be able to develop a contract schedule using CPM means and methods, which is still probably the fastest way to be able to create a high level view of a plan. Get it to the level that you think it at least makes sense. That could be a level 2, level 3, WBS. And then when you're there, hand it off to a field team to start putting in the details that they need to manage production in tasks. The beauty of that is that you're not adding activities to the CPM network. So the volume of the project doesn't necessarily have to get bigger from your activity network side. But the details that the job site team needs to manage production, you can blow out as many tasks against an activity as you want. And it's a completely different user experience. A lot of that is aligned to sort of lean construction means and methods, but it's far more approachable for a lot of field teams to be able to do the detailed planning on weekly work plans. And I'll just think of this as like short interval planning, condensed planning when you're in a 6 week, 4 week, 3 week, 1 week look ahead, where those field teams might be doing this in an analog process on a card wall in a trailer today. And we've created an experience where you could digitize that same analog card wall, put it into a digital card wall, be able to structurally tie it easily to an activity in your CPM network. And there you go, one unified plan. So I can keep the volume of the CPM activities lower. I can still have all of the production richness and the detail that my job site team needs to do their daily work. And that can happen within a task engine, but it's structurally tied to the CPM contract. That is super unique for Oracle Primavera Cloud. And it's been fun to watch sort of the slow uptake of this. I remember going when LCI first came out with the conferences 15, 17 plus years ago, there were maybe 50 of us that were there talking about this as an evolution of where we would be able to move the scheduling needle. And now, I was there for the Congress this past year, and there's 2,500 people. So that concept has taken off, which is great. It's another way of trying to get more collaboration put into the schedule with the folks that are closer to the work, which is always a valuable thing. And that was one of the complaints I think a lot of folks had with P6 is that it was a great office tool. It didn't necessarily always translate into being a great field tool. And what we're trying to create in sort of the strategy longer term in the view of watching these schedule evolutions come together is take the best of both of those things and blend them. But don't blend them in different products, blend them in one platform. So I don't have to structurally leave that system to be able to have an experience for a field team to get in there and blow out all the details for job site task production. And I can have an experience for an office team that is really managing the master contract.
The funny thing is, you're really starting to show our age here, going back to probably your Bechdel days when
It's
I
not, yeah.
started.
I should have more gray. I'm just genetically lucky. Yeah, it's not the years, Dan, it's the mileage.
Well, when I started in this industry, if you were doing a field site walk, you're walking around with a Palm Pilot. taking notes on your Palm Pilot. Then if
Oh
you were
man.
one of the lucky ones, you go to the hood of your work truck and then get on your Tough Book. If your company had Tough Books, do your updates in the software. Then you walk in the trailer, and on the trailer wall is your 24 by 36 RHD plot where you're snapping a chalk line as your data date and then filling in the colors with magic markers.
Yeah. Yeah, it has changed a lot, right? Mobile was a big transformation for every company.
Yep.
And every technology company was, had to figure out a strategy on how to go through and handle it. And then the cloud became yet another, sort of digital transformation event. And it's been interesting to watch, right? Especially as a 4 decade plus old, technology company, how you stay relevant and how you continue to build things that are those best practices and can continue to advance where that tech is likely to go. I mean, we haven't even talked about some of the stuff that we're working on in our AI frontier and all the cool stuff that's going to be, landing within other Oracle applications and all this like the stuff that we're doing at the database. And, oh, it's a lot of investment, and it's fun to watch, right? But it's changed a ton, right? I think the way that we can get more people involved in planning and scheduling for me is an exciting milestone.
Yeah,
When I started
absolutely.
off, at Bechtel, it could be a career. And then I think we had a lot of different technologies come out from being just on a desktop where you were married to that desktop all day. And as soon as, a mobile device came along, that just changed the nature of where I might be able to do some of my work. And then the cloud switched that yet again. So all of that has opened up a larger opportunity for us to capture, get more people involved in planning and scheduling as a discipline. And I think that's the more interesting part for me. Like, how do we get more folks that are closer to the work engaged in developing a quality plan?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going back, we'll say, not to age ourselves 20 years, and just even a decade ago, working on an LNG facility, we would hire a helicopter and a pilot each day to do flyovers to take still photos and video recordings of the
Now you
project.
can just do it
So
with a
you
drone,
can,
right? Yeah, like now we
and
can stick a camera on a drone and we can just capture the whole day.
yeah, that would
So
cost thousands of dollars a day for the helicopter. Now you get a drone pilot for a few $100, maybe an hour or something, and it's done in an hour rather than taking a whole day to do it. It's very interesting where it's come from. And, that kind of leads into talking about the way old things were and getting back into this. Which tool do you believe offers a more intuitive interface for schedulers and planners?
it's a great question. Right? So the way that I learned it and the way that you learned it probably isn't the way that it should be ultimately done, but it's sort of like joining the fraternity where you're kind of get hazed through it, where you got a copy of P3 or you got a copy of P6, you were put on a job site and they're like, figure this out. Uh, Just because that's the way that a lot of construction companies, engineering companies operate doesn't necessarily mean that's a great idea. I think there's still a lot of muscle memory in that. That sort of hazing routine of here's this tool, just go start doing it. P6 is an amazing product, but it's not the easiest thing for beginners to pick up and be competent and productive in a short period of time. It takes a little while to learn all the different things that it can do. It's not as approachable for beginners as it is for experts. When you're an expert in it, man, I mean, you can make that thing sing. It's incredible. And we thought a lot about that when we were developing Oracle Primavera Cloud, which was we need to create an experience that's approachable for beginners that are transitioning potentially from, another software. It could be something like a Microsoft project, or some other sort of field tool that they're used to that might be that sort of, analog card wall experience. And how could we get you in and have you be productive like really quickly without that same learning curve requirement of what we might have had within P6. And to me, it's a difficult nut to crack, right? Because trying to come up with something that is great for beginners and great for experts takes a lot of time. But man, we're there. It is it is an incredible platform now. And what I like about where we're seeing our user growth for a lot of like mid-market companies, which to me is the majority of engineering and construction, companies that are sort of in this 50 million to $250 million, kind of revenue range. Those sorts of contractors and subcontractors, they don't really want something complicated, especially when you talk to field people. They need something that is simple to use, easy to pick up, like has a viral adoption set and can be deployed out, like fast. So that's the issue to crack. But the Office team has a slightly different, series of needs and wants, right? They want centralization of the data. They want standardization on how people are going to go through to do things. Like there's all the roll up and reporting of eventually getting your hands around all projects. And all that's really important. So with OPC, that's really been the strategy from day one was how do we create an experience that lets beginners come in and when they need more, when you gradually, become more disciplined in what you do in building the schedules out, how can we just turn more on for you, open another door for you, expose more capability or more configurability within it so that you don't have to leave that system when you kind of graduate out. That's been interesting to watch just from folks that have maybe transitioned from things like a Microsoft project over the last, say, year and a half and have just said, we outgrew it. Like we just outgrew what we really wanted to be able to do on getting our arms around. Like maybe they landed a bigger project or a bigger program. So you were making sort of technology investments, based upon what the job was. You landed a big project, you needed something with more horsepower, you might look at P6. You had small projects, you didn't need as much horsepower, you might use something, like an MSP. And today in Oracle Primavera Cloud, what's great is that we can have experiences that bring both of those communities together. I've got an experience that's great for beginners, and I've got an experience that's great for experts. And you don't have to leave the system to be able to do it. Way more configurable in just how we were thinking of the architecture too, right? So the whole concept of workspaces rather than, an enterprise project structure, in the EPS of what we did in P6. Workspace is way more flexible in how we can handle security. As that community of people that can be involved in developing a project plan has gotten bigger, which is a great thing, it's also fairly complicated to get your arms around the security of how that really works and allow people to make, those decisions based upon their company. How do they want to see it? How do they want their little slice of that environment to really look and feel? So that's been fun to see.
And kind of expanding on the UI, and you had mentioned configurations, how do visualizations, say like the Gantt chart, dashboard, scenario planning, how do they differ between the two tool sets?
Well, it's fair to say, even though we make a lot of advancements in P6, the UI hasn't probably changed a ton. The way that store looks when you walk into it is pretty similar to the way that it looked, 10 years ago, which is great. There's a lot of comfort in that, right? When I
Mhm.
walk into a Target, I know exactly how to get my way or, around the Target. They're all laid out the same. So that's the point. Um, and in OPC, it's more modern, right? It is, I don't know if it's necessarily a function of the fact that it's just a cloud product. People perceive it as being simpler. But the interesting thing, Dan, and you'll love this because I know you experience this with implementations too, is taking a P6 user and putting them into OPC is actually harder than taking a net new user and putting P6 or OPC next to them and how fast they pick up that.
Correct.
So a greenfield person coming in picks up OPC like that, which is awesome. Because why? They don't have this mental map of a store from P6 holding them back on how to navigate it and where to go. So it's far more intuitive for new users to pick up OPC and be productive quickly versus putting them into P6 and having them go through what you and I went through, which was here you go, here's your workstation, figure it out. And we got there, but it could have been faster if there was maybe a little more training, a little more help, right? But it's been interesting to see that cohort of folks that were used to P6, and this is you and me, right? I had to do the exact same thing. And I had to do the same thing when I moved from P3 into P6. You're learning a different store. You're learning a different layout. Where things are is a little different than what you remember. It can still do all of those same things, and in a lot of cases, a lot more. but where those functions are relative to menus and like how you go through to get it around. We have a whole like user testing group that we spend a lot of time, before we release products to try and figure out ways that we can continue to reduce clicks, make it more efficient, make it easier to navigate. And that configuration option changes are also relative to the maturity that you've got, sort of time and system. Once you're used to, and I'll go back to your Target store, like once you're used to walking in and out of Target, 10 times, you're like, okay, I got it. I think I know how this works.
I think everybody's figuring out your favorite store is Target.
Well,
That's all good.
it's probably REI or sports basement to be, candid. But like I think Target's a more universal example. Probably most folks have walked in and out of a Target.
Not to get into any type of taboo category, because I know the roadmap is usually, very secretive, but there's been a lot of changes, say, in the last year in OPC. And what I want to kind of maybe dive into are any type of automation features. The buzzword of the day is AI. Do you see, or is there any capabilities for any type of like auto scheduling or AI driven insights that are available in OPC or potentially coming down the road, or even if there's something being developed for
Or
P6?
even stuff for P6. So yeah, great question. And we get a lot of questions on this. The well, yeah, this is just candid talk, right? So I'm not really giving anything away more than it's just the here's the stuff that I know we're working on. So there are some really interesting things that we're doing, leveraging AI. I think what we've done in just seeing the capabilities, what we've done in leveraging things like Oracle 23 AI database, which has a lot of automation in how you manage the database itself, which is amazing. And all of that sitting on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for OCI. In the applications themselves, we're beginning to bake in a lot more AI experiences, and some of them might seem like low-hanging fruit, but the stuff that, folks should be, not too long from now, being able to take advantage of could be something just as simple as a help assistant. So when you are in the application and I go to our standard help today, it will reference, and it does references our documentation, but that documentation is pretty rich, right? Doesn't necessarily, it's not always the easiest thing for me to be able to navigate, especially for folks that are self-starters, and they don't necessarily come with questions that are sort of natural language based. So you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more of contextual understanding when you are on a specific page. Let's say you're on the activity page, and you might ask the question of, how do I make an activity? How do I tie these things together? How do I create a relationship? But it could be just like that. It could just be, how do I tie these things together? And we will understand what you mean by tie these things together is you're trying to create a relationship tie. You want a logic tie. How do I, go through and add resources to something? Or how do I create a workspace? Or how would I add cost to a schedule? Or how would I resource load this thing? So a lot of those types of questions are going to be more natively understanding of the context of the page that you're on. And then what are the types of questions that people typically ask when they're at that page? So I just think of it like a context aware help assistant that is going to sort of move you through the system with a little bit more, go as you at your own pace of getting answers to questions that are most commonly asked. So that's one thing. The other exciting stuff we're working on isn't just I think there's kind of two times where assistance can be really helpful during scheduled development and during scheduled progress and update. So while things are in flight, like how can we also help you go through that update on automation on the progressing itself. So all the stuff that you were mentioning on scenario management and how we handle baselines and how we merge schedules together, that whole concept of how we handled baselines in P6 and what we do with scenarios and merging schedules in OPC, we fundamentally rewrote all of that. How we go through to handle baselines and merge information that takes place on any individual update, reporting cycle, it is just way cleaner a process in OPC. But let's jump back to the schedule development part. One of the other fun little projects we have in flight now, and will also get released at some point here in the future, not crazy long from now, is being able to consume an RFP. So let's say I'm a general contractor, I consume an RFP. I want to be able to basically build out a project shell quickly. And I would love to be able to, look at not just filling out the details of the project shell based upon the contract value, the description, what type of work it is, all of that, as well as, start and end dates for when this whole thing was like looking at scope, but also give you suggestions on what your WBS should be. And maybe even down to the not only what the WBS should be, but what should the activities also be inside that. So think about a lot of our schedule development work today. Folks that might have built out templates, that's great. You're going to get a chance to start leveraging those templates, put those things into large language models. We'll be able to start extracting some of that information and help you build a rough order of magnitude. I think of it kind of like going 85 yards down the field, and putting the schedule together. It's still not going to be, it's not going to be perfect. You're still going to add to it and make changes and all of that and refine it. But that whole process of getting a schedule kicked up and having it be a quality plan is going to just go faster. And I think that's exciting because that is something that does, I wouldn't say add to a lot of people's time, but those are the times that tend to be pretty intensive. It's intensive when I'm doing schedule development to just make it. And then it's intensive when we're going through the statusing and the update. So those are two areas where we're going to be applying a little bit more of where that automation and where AI can be valuable. So those are just a couple processes and a couple things that are, in flight happening. But there's a long list of stuff that we're going to keep adding to. And I'm excited about that. Just because, like you said, as a scheduler, I would love to be able to have, automation in my day. I used to argue during a schedule update that if it was me always calling in to try and figure out what that update was, and people didn't have access to be able to get to that data, then it was basically like saying that I had to have 100% of one person's time to get an update done. And I would much rather have had a way to be able to distribute information out, let people go in and do the updates remotely with whatever they had in their hand, to make it 1% of 100 people's effort and shrink the time so I could go watch my kid's soccer game.
Yeah.
And so, and if you've lived on a job site, like that is a real thing. Like that time is hard to quantify. It's hard to quantify. Well, if I can get answers to things, that was all that still is the intrinsic value in being able to run a good quality plan is when people come into my office and they ask me, questions about the schedule or questions about the project, that I can filter the junk out that I know doesn't need to be there. I can just include the components that matter and I can shrink all that stuff down to be able to give you that answer and that can happen fast. So whether it's the ways that we go through and add to filtering or our coding structures or the ways that we're going to build out, faster, easier layout development, or you might be able to bring things to screen and maybe eventually ask a question of, could you just make a report and then could you send this to everybody that's on my distribution list? Like, so we do those things through certain, button clicks and things today, but it would be a lot more fun to start talking to it. And as soon as we could start talking to it, I mean, I'm just imagining me being on a job site somewhere and, like, take a picture of a component of what we're doing a status on and be like, could you just mark this as done? Could you mark this as done or it's not done? I say, hey, you know what? You can't mark this as done, and I need you to call the superintendent or call the foreman and get them over here because we're going to have an issue with this thing. So those are the sorts of automations that like get into the what function is the software going to do for me next is the frontier of where this is going to really crack open.
That kind of beats the dust off of starting a project with a 300-page plan, specification, design, architects, and trying to develop a schedule off of that from many, many moons ago.
Yeah, and I think, even in the P6 world, we did a lot of this to cut corners, right? We would build out templates. I would typically use templates or as-builts might become new templates. And that library of those templates become ways that I can get that schedule development process in quicker. But that same concept of templates that I have, in addition to the RFP requirements of what I have, and being able to have those two things ultimately kind of blend together, again, it's just a way to accelerate a little bit of the timing. It will still require experts, which is a good thing, to go through and validate and make sure that you're happy with that plan and add components to it and enrich the details of it. But something that can kickstart you getting going is great, especially in an industry where I think we have a lot of intellectual capital that's retiring. And how are we capturing what those people know? You're like, where's it going? So as we bring new people into engineering and construction, and hopefully that's something that we can like tech can be a way to entice folks to not just go work for Google when they get out of school, is how do we make it interesting for them to want to come into engineering and construction and build a career here?
Mhm.
So the tech is one part of it. which is great because I think it is a way to attract talent. But we also want to teach people to not just be tech jockeys. Like we want to have them learn how to be builders. And longtime PM friend of mine always said, a fool with a tool is still a fool, and it can be garbage in, garbage out, right? So just because you know how to work a specific tool doesn't mean like I always said like schedulers and planners aren't the same thing.
Exactly.
It's great if they are. It's great if you're a planner scheduler, if you know how to build a plan, but you have a lot of folks where that scheduling discipline might have just been you know how to run the tool, and we're not teaching you how to run that tool to actually become a better planner, or the types of questions that that tool might be able to provide for you that helps you that plan improve over time. So it's a part of their career growth thing that obviously every company has a different slant on what they mean for it. But from our standpoint as the tech provider, that is my hope, my continued hope, kind of glass half full, would be we're going to use things like technology to try and entice new people to want to come into this, but it's because those tools are going to be so powerful, and we're going to help you become better builders.
Great point. Absolutely great point. And, seeing that transition from the older generation into the new generation, obviously technology does play a big part in that, but having the knowledge behind just outside the technology is key. And having that older generation be able to pass that knowledge on is what's going to transform this into that next generation of your planners, schedulers, is that industry knowledge behind it. So yeah, absolutely.
All that information has to go somewhere
It
if we're
does.
smart. If
Yes.
we're smart.
So coming to the end of this, one big question, and I like to ask this a lot to people, is what's one myth about scheduling in Primavera tools that you'd like to try and bust today?
Ugh. Well, it's we've touched on it a little bit, but I think as a legacy brand, we have always been known as as great at handling the large complex stuff. And it's always been a tool, P6 specifically, even P3 specifically, that was great, once you were sort of in that middle layer to expert layer. You get a lot of value out of it. It can do a lot for you. It's great at you walking into my office at 4:58 and needing an answer by 5, and I can actually get it for you. Like there's a lot of power in it. But that same rub of it's great for big, complicated work meant that we were missing out on how to attract or make it simple for more beginners to get in and be productive. And to me, that's been the most exciting part to see what we've done with Oracle Primavera Cloud.
Typically, the way I look at it is, I mean, we've both been around a long time. We've seen tools come, we see tools go. What I like to say, the myth that I like to bust, and you did mention this earlier, hey, you know what? Even though we do have OPC, P6 isn't going anywhere. My response to that is sustainability. It's
Yeah,
always sustainability.
yeah.
Oracle's been around for so long, the tools have been around for so long. We try to harp on saying, hey, you know what, this isn't going anywhere. I don't care what rumors that you hear, but it's always about sustainability, that you're making the investment today for tomorrow.
It's yeah, I mean on the emotional side, Dan, like this is it's a real topic because just think back to when you and I went through the transition of moving from P3 to P6. I remember, and I did have, close friends that said, "You'll rip P3 out of my cold dead hand." But there is a future proofing to your career that can take place when you embrace new things. And it's not that you have to be on the bleeding edge of that new thing, but there's a way that I looked at, and this is just to be a personal note, like on my career, learning those new tools helped me keep going. And that's a great thing, right? And it's not that there isn't still value for, there probably are a few folks that are still out there that, are running something on P3. And there will be people for a long, long time that are still going to be running things on P6, and that's great. But another way that you can future-proof your career is looking at some of these new tools and getting familiar with these new tools and understanding what those capabilities, can help you do as a way of sort of solidifying, where your value will continue to grow in something that is still uniquely human. Because for job sites, at least for now, we still make things as humans until we, program robots to fight with other robots, on site where we put the trades against each other in some weird, programmatic way. But for right now, anyway, the good news is that, builders are still, it's still by our hands, baby. Like this is the great part about our business. Part of what I love about and have always loved about engineering construction is there's a lot of value when you work with your hands. And it's incredibly gratifying work. And I can walk into almost any major city anywhere in the world and I can point to something and I can say, Primavera helped make that thing happen. That was our project.
Mm.
That airport that I just walked through, that was our project. That water treatment plant on how water gets to my house, that was done with Primavera. They used Primavera. Oh, that, skyscraper over there, that was made with Primavera. So like, that's always been cool. Like the projects have always been the elixir for me. But it it's a fair statement, of how do these new tools ultimately, gain more time and round for adoption. Some of it is that we need to be better at making those experiences more palatable, more approachable for people that are on the earlier side of that career curve. But know that if they need to grow, and they will grow, and mature in that capability set and that discipline around project controls, planning, and scheduling as a discipline, that there's space for them to do it. And you don't ever have to leave to get more. That was kind of our core thesis and when we were putting OPC together. And I think that's still the goal, right? The goal is to make planning more collaborative, get more people involved in this thing, get the people that are closer to the work, engaged in helping that definition happen. But, still understand that you need to tie those things into the contract framework of what originally was in that RFP, right? And aligns with that part for the spec. Like there's still a series of rules, and for good reason why we have these rules and how we execute engineering construction projects today on the planet everywhere. So it's yeah, it's an interesting time, bud. I mean, we've got a lot going on.
It's funny, and I'll give you a little nugget that you can either chuckle on now or chuckle on later because you mentioned, pry from my cold dead hands. And when that transition was going from P3 to P6, you were going from 16-bit to 32-bit. And I actually knew
Most people
somebody
won't
that,
even know what the hell you're talking about right now,
I
by the
know
way.
somebody
Right?
that
Like it'd be like 6, 7. I don't understand. Like, what was this?
I know somebody that went out and bought a closet full of 16-bit computers so they could continually run P3 because they
Right,
were
right,
P6.
right, right. Yeah.
It was,
Yeah, it happens over time, right? And I know we talked a little bit about this last time, which is, specifications, especially on the owner side, don't downshift or upshift all that fast. So it does take a little bit of time for those things to mature. But here's the great news, because P6 and OPC are engineered to work together, it, you don't have to wait if you don't want to wait. Um, you can still be in compliance with a contract that specifies P6 and get into OPC and start playing around and having some fun with it. I've lived through a few of these waves. It was amazing being on the wave of P3, kind of taking off. I like, and it was literally that way. It was almost kind of word of mouth. I mean, when I started at Bechtel, we used it across a lot of different projects. But part of the reason why it went organically viral is because you'd be sitting in the office and you would talk to some guy from a different division or business unit, and you go like, "What were you guys using on the last project?" You'd be like, "Oh, I used this thing called P3. It was great." And then that story gets out, and then it happens on another project, and it happens on another project, and it happens on another, and then suddenly organizations kind of figure out they're using it on so many projects. Well, is there an enterprise option? Like, why wouldn't I just stop buying the bar drink at a time? So same thing is true, but every organization has a different way that they kind of get there. Eventually everybody starts to care about all projects at some point in time. So how you get your arms around all that stuff is important. But but yeah, it is an emotional switch for a lot of people, on how to embrace, doing something a little different. and what can this next thing do for me? And I've always leaned into it. That's just kind of the way I'm wired. So, as a self-starter, I wanted to learn it. I've wanted to learn how to do new things. I feel like I've always been that way. But not everybody's on a different track for that. So we just got to be sensitive to it. And the nice part is this is exactly what services and like what DR McNally is so amazing at is like you understand this better than anybody, right? Like you work with customers every single day that are running some process and they love the way that process works, or there's certain components of how they run that process. And they're like, God, you know what? If we could just change these two things, if I could just make this part about my update cycle just this incrementally a little bit better. Every time that I try and get subcontractors to be able to submit their information in, it takes me forever to figure out what changed in that schedule file and how I'm going to merge it into my current. Like, could that just get easier? So yes, it can, right? We've thought about these things. Like we don't build software, for like vanilla ice cream on any type of project that you're out there doing. We build things for engineers and builders. Like that's all we've ever done. That's all we're ever gonna do. And I like that focus. I think that focus matters. It means that we get what those best practices are all about. And and if you're an engineer or you're a builder, you know, you should want to come to me. Like we get how it works.
It's I love how we're talking about the past and stuff like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a bonus question your way, and I'm going to call this the brain teaser. I was recently at an event, and this conference actually had like a mobile app with a community board in it, where you could set meetups for whatever it may be, and companies like ours ran contests, and I ran a contest, and this was a 3-day event. And I put it out on day one. Somebody finally came with the right answer on day three after about 50 submissions. And I had some Oracle F1 swag to give away for the proper answer. And I was kind of shocked that I did get somebody to finally answer it. And going back in time, you're talking about, hey, you know what? You can take stuff out of OPC if there's a P6 requirement. And pretty much everybody in our industry knows what XCR files are. It's the proprietary Primavera format. My brain teaser to you is the acronym XCR. Do you know what it stands for?
Oh my God. Wow. You know what? It'd be uh yeah, this is gonna be embarrassing because you could give me probably almost any other Primavera trivia question, and I probably know. Um, no. Isn't that shocking? I'm just like, it's just the Kool-Aid that I've always just drank. I'm like, oh, this is just the format for it. And yep, this is exactly what we do. It's been interesting, right? Because it's sort of a blessing and a curse that that format, has become such an industry standard. And then, now we start looking at moving information back and forth. It's not, we do that. We can send out XCR files from OPC. We can bring in XCR files from P6. But XML is actually even a richer format that brings a richer data set to be able to also transfer things back and forth. But yeah, no. So Dan, yeah, this will be you telling me, you coaching me on exactly like what I probably should have just known off the top of my head. So this is great. This is my Friday gotcha question. This is the full stump the monkey.
It is, and I probably, depending on how far this reaches our audience, we may not be able to run this contest at an event again. But the acronym XCR stands for Extract Eagle Ray.
Oh, well, yeah, that would make sense because it was originally an Eagle Ray acquisition. Oh
Yes.
my gosh. Yeah, right. Like the Occam's razor thing is probably where I should have gone. I should have just gone into the what's the what's the super dumb way that we would have just defined it.
Yeah.
It's like people always say, like, well, what we're really doing is just extracting Eagle Ray data. Oh, okay. Let's just call it that. That sounds like something we would probably do. Yeah, that's great. Actually, that's pretty funny.
I had some Oracle people at our booth at this event, and none of them knew what it was either. So don't worry, you're not the only one. Like I said, I got 50 submissions and one person got it right. And
Wow, I wouldn't have won the hat. That's I yeah, and I deserved every bit of that. I
actually,
deserved
it
every bit of
was
that.
a Oracle F1 racing backpack with one of the model cars in it.
Yeah, it's okay. I got enough I got enough tchotchke stuff in my house. I'm looking for
Something,
less, not more.
something you can use to try
I'm
and
putting that one right in the vault, baby.
there you
That's
go.
going in. That's not, yeah, I think I got it. I'll remember that for sure.
Perfect. Garrett, I really appreciate you taking the time. You got any final words or anything you'd like to add before we end?
Just thanks for the opportunity. You know, it is a very exciting time, and it's great to just get into these types of discussions, help share some information for folks that are out there. You guys do such an incredible job, working with customers and helping customers implement our software, and just an invaluable part of our success. So it's always great to see you, buddy.
Hey, thanks a lot for your time, man. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch up again very soon.
Sounds good. Can't wait for the next one.